Hi everyone, it's Justin Blaney. I'm pleased to be with you today. This is Mentoring Leaders Live with Pastor Wayne Cordeiro. Wayne, so glad you could join us today.
Justin, it's great. We're here in Hawaii and you're in Seattle. It's a 70 here and it's what
It's
there?
not 70 here. I wish I could show you what we're putting up with over here, but then again, everybody knows Hawaii's good. You've got a retreat coming up. Tell me a bit about this event that's coming up soon. I'd like to come down. It's a pastor's deal.
Yes, actually we do that every year. It's a Hawaii Pastors Practicum, and so they are with us for about a week and we walk together and we discuss things about ministry, sometimes spontaneously, sometimes more intentional. So we also have a conference coming up called Doing Church as a Team, how to get volunteers involved in the ministry.
Well, you have a competitive advantage being in Hawaii. Everybody wants to come down there anyways, so you can come down, get encouraged, and you get the beach, the weather, 84-degree weather. Pretty nice
Yeah,
deal.
that's just the blessings of God. What happened in Seattle?
We have to attract people with everything besides the weather up here. Well, for those who are joining us who are new to mentoring leaders, Pastor Wayne, can you tell us a little bit about your vision for why you created this blog, this channel, so that those who are first turning in can hear a little bit more about that?
Justin, it started long ago when I was looking for some mentoring, and I remember I was a 32-year-old pastor, and I started calling pastors asking if they would spend a day with me, half a day with me, just tell me, download everything you could. And out of 10 of those pastors, 8 of them said they didn't have time.
Mm.
And one of them could spend a few hours, the other had time for lunch. And I was thinking, if I, a hungry 32-year-old young leader, can hardly get those who are supposedly veterans to help, I thought, what's going to happen with those who maybe are not as hungry as I am and don't take that initiative? So that led me to believe that the adage that I often say, that tomorrow's greatest problem of our church is not the lack of leaders, it's the overabundance of underdeveloped, under-mentored leaders.
Mm.
So we thought, let's do a MentoringLeaders.com that's specifically designed to help budding leaders that have questions and have time to dialogue them so that we get it right, get it straight, because we're going to need to know what we're talking about, especially in these last days.
We just did a show yesterday on Innovate for Jesus, which has a similar heart. We're trying to resource leaders in it. We were talking to some entrepreneurs about how in the small business world, you need to have great mentors. You look at Facebook, Google. If you look at the beginnings of these companies, those leaders had key mentoring relationships in place, and they didn't just get there all on their own. And I was talking about how, I know guys like you, like Larry Osborne, who are very open to mentoring people. It's been my experience that maybe culture has changed, and I'm curious to see what you think. If it seems like today you can call up a church and ask for help, and people are a lot more open to mentoring. Do you find that that's true?
Yes and no. Free mentoring is less. One of
A
the
little different.
dangers that, because in the last 15 years, Justin, now this is just my opinion, because we've relied so heavily on corporate best practices, we have slipped into the corporation mindset of making sure that it's profitable, what we're doing. And I know on one hand, making profit is important because you've got to carry on the ministry. The other benefit of it is it sort of filters out those that really aren't that interested in learning. Because if you don't have a buy-in, you don't really have a takeaway. But on the other hand, the calling can become something more corporate, where ministry becomes a business. And that's the balance that I want to make sure that we strike well, so that we're helping those that want to be helped without trying to profit off of it and make it into a business. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a huge movement right now with coaching. Everybody, I swear, everywhere I turn, there's a coach. Coaches for everything, right? But yes, there's a fee involved with the coaching, and I can see what you mean about how the church world has sort of adopted the corporate mindset where, okay, we're going to coach you, but it's going to be $300 an hour, and we're going to come in and do an $8,000 workshop with your church. But there's still the need for, I mean, maybe it's a different kind of relationship because there is a place for that, but where do you see that in the place with just, I don't want to call it free mentoring, but where people are getting together, they're rubbing on each other, they're sharing, they're growing. Where does that fit into it?
Yeah, I think the old way of, honorariums is fine, but once we start to put a price on things, I'm not talking about resources, because if you have a book or something, there's costs to the printing of this. I understand that, but on yourself, it gets a little. We probably can dialogue a whole session on that, Justin. On how do you keep that balance so it continues to be a calling and it doesn't become something that's corporate.
Well, speaking of calling, in MentoringLeaders.com, we've been having a lot of resources. We've been kind of launching into this new year with a lot of focus on the need for personal devotion. I remember one of the first times you and I sat down, we talked about one of your great books, Leading on Empty, and how your need for personal devotion, for personal time with the Lord, helped you pull you out of that as you started to focus on that more. So talk to me about your heart for leaders today and the need to have that personal connection with God, that personal devotion time.
Yeah, Justin, everything that a leader does is going to come out of their personal devotion and their discipleship, their ability to allow, for example, right now I'm going through Exodus, I'm allowing Moses and the life of Moses to disciple me, to mentor me. And there's no greater mentors than these divine mentors. And so, for example, yesterday and today, I understood a leadership principle out of Moses where he had a propensity to take shortcuts and to sort of do as little as he needed to and still be obedient to God. And God was really dealing with that. For example, he threw the staff down, it turned into a snake, and it says, and he ran from the snake. And often we run from the things that God will show us to say that you can do something large. And we say, oh, that's not me. But really it could be an excuse that I don't really want to work that hard. The risks are too great. And then, well, I'm going to have you speak, Moses. Well, I'm not that good of a speaker. Get my brother. And it says here that actually the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. He's saying, you're constantly getting out of things. And then Zipporah does his circumcision of his son, and it said he was going through the town and God was going to slay him. So somehow God must have spoken to him about circumcising his son, and he had so many reasons why he didn't need to. Maybe he's too young, or he's not fully Jewish, because Zipporah isn't fully Jewish, and I'm from Egypt, and I'm different, and God is saying you have so many excuses to take shortcuts as a leader. And so I wrote in my journal, in fact, here it is here, all the tendencies that young leaders have to take shortcuts in obedience. And God mentored me through Moses. Leadership comes out of mentoring. It's the result of good mentoring. And sometimes we say, well, I don't have people that I can go to. Well, you have a bunch of them right here. And there's no better mentors. And that's why your devotional life is absolutely critical to leadership, especially today.
I love the idea that just because we don't have the ability to talk to somebody doesn't mean that they can't talk to us. And all these great patriarchs are talking to us through the Word. Not only that, we've got people like C.S. Lewis, other contemporary authors who can be mentors to us. Who are some of your go-tos?
Yeah, I tell people that you have contemporary mentors. Bill Hybels will be here next month, Craig Rochelle, and so we hang out, and there's peer mentoring. They're contemporary mentors to me, and hopefully me a little to them, but more the other way, them to me. But you also have literary and historical mentors. Literary mentors are those that might write now, Tim Keller or Max Lucado. You have a lot of people that you can't access physically, but they will still mentor you through their writings. And then the historical mentors, those like Mother Teresa and these wonderful late missionaries, Jonathan Goforth, Hudson Taylor, David Livingstone, they've mentored me so much. They're historical mentors, but yet through their writings, they can come alive again, and especially the Word of God. In Hebrews 11:4, it says, Abel, though he is dead, he still speaks. That's pretty cool.
We had a question come in, and that reminds me, we would love for you who are watching to be a part of the show. All you have to do to ask a question is tweet with the hashtag MentoringLeaders, and we have producers who are standing by. They're going to try to feed those questions in. We were talking exactly in this conversation about how a lot of mentoring relationships are one way. We're reading a book, and it's a one-way communication. But this is a chance for you to be mentored by Pastor Wayne live. Just ask a question, and we'll try to get it in. Kevin Thomas asked something that's pertinent to what we're talking about, and that is, how do you develop sermons out of your SOAP journaling? And I love the SOAP system. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But help answer Kevin's question on how you're developing sermons out of your daily devotions.
Yeah, I don't go into it. Is it Kevin? I don't go
Kevin
into
Thomas.
it looking for a sermon. I go into it looking to feed my soul, period. It's not what I can feed others. I look into my devotion as what I can eat because my soul is hungry and my life is hungry. But when it's done, and this is just a new journal that I just began, but I'm going to show you sort of the table of contents. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a couple of big black dots on this page. Now, this is the beginning of my table of contents. So I just started it about 3 days ago, a new journal. But after I'm done writing it, if I think this is a transferable truth, I have to remember this. I put a big dot next to it so that when I'm preparing a sermon, I'll remember and I'll go down here and I'll say, spiritual shortcuts. I can do a whole message to leaders on that. Now, it might not be a Sunday morning message, but if I'm going to do a leadership talk or I'm going to meet with leaders, this will remind me leadership or spiritual shortcuts. That could be a whole talk. Now, did I go into my devotions looking for a talk? No. I look to eat. But after it's done, the Lord says, that's a transferable concept that you must teach. I have it already logged in here and ready to go. So it works as a both and. But always remember, you don't go in here looking for talks. You go in here looking to eat.
Yeah, because the difference is it becomes a job, right? You're doing a study for a sermon rather than studying to edify yourself first, which I like the analogy when the plane is going down, the air masks come down, and you're supposed to put the air mask on yourself first before you put the air mask on your kid next to you, because if you don't help yourself, you can't help anybody else.
Yeah, and if you think about it, if all of the Christians are starving, then how are starving people going to help others eat? They've got to eat themselves first, for themselves. The same is true with anything else. If we're all poor, so that's a good discussion. We'll talk about that later, Justin, on one of these times on the balance between the corporate and the calling. But if we're all in abject poverty, how are we going to help the poor? So you have to understand, you've got to get your help first so that you can help others. Now, I understand that there's that sidebar of, well, Jesus was on the cross and he still brought healing when his body was broken. I understand that. But the overall principle is we can't be starving to death and weak and expect others to become through us healthy and whole. It has to start with us.
Yeah, and Jesus had a deep well from which to draw, even in its brokenness. He can minister to us, and we're not always quite on the same level of deepness in our connection to God, right?
That's great. That's so true.
So I like this idea that you brought up about, and you just journal about shortcuts in ministry. Something I've found in life in general is that shortcuts rarely pay off. It seems to me like God just doesn't work through shortcuts. It seems most of the time that he likes this slow, steady climb, and I think that's a beautiful thing, rather than looking for the shortcut, which usually ends up being a ton of work and you don't get anything out of it. Sometimes you end up looking like a fool in the process. Talk to me a little bit more about that. What have been some of your thoughts on that related to ministry?
Whenever we take shortcuts, it surfaces a tendency, it's a blight on our soul that has to be eradicated, and that is the tendency that surfaces is that I am result-oriented more than obedience-oriented. I want results now. For example, a lot of people don't really want to pray, they just want the results of someone who did. I really don't want to work on my marriage. I just want I want the results of someone who did. I don't want to budget my money and save for 20 years. I just want the income and the savings of someone who did. And that's not available. It's a blight on our soul of today, and we want something now. We're impatient and greedy, and so we take shortcuts because we're result oriented and we think about ourselves rather than obedience oriented and simply obeying what Jesus asks us to do regardless of the results. Because sometimes, as you read in Hebrews chapter 11, some of those who were in the faith and found their way into the hall of faith, it says they were destitute, they were thrown to the animals, they were sawn in two, and others received their dead back from the grave and found resurrection and miracles. So sometimes what we say is sometimes God's going to Job you and sometimes he's going to Abraham you. And you have to be okay with both. Sometimes he's going to take everything away and sometimes he's going to give you everything. And both must be stewarded in faith.
Yeah, good word. So I know that New Hope has a college in Eugene, and you're interfacing, you're teaching students all the time, and I know that you have a heart for that. Talk to me about maybe what an everyday Christian could learn from the process of going through seminary and sort of that deep dive, that daily study. Is there something that contemporary Christian America is missing out on?
Yeah, again, that would be a tendency sometimes for us to jump into the battle without the training. And we find in Paul, he was mentoring Timothy. He says to Timothy in the book of Timothy, he says, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness. Discipline yourself. And that's the Greek word gymnaze seauton, discipline yourself. The word discipline is the Greek word gymnaze, which is the word we use for gymnasium. And here's what Paul was saying to Timothy. Before you get out onto the course, before you get out onto the track, get back in the gymnasium. Get yourself in the gymnasium and train until you're ready for the track. See, a lot of us, we just want to go on the track and show everybody what we can do. And then we're sorely disappointed. Paul says to Timothy, if you're going to be a good leader, get in the gym. Spend more time in the gym, and nobody's going to make you go into the gym but yourself. Gymnaze seauton. Gymnaze yourself. And so with the concentrated amount of download and input that a Bible college or seminary can give you, there is a drilling of depth. It doesn't mean it'll all be filled when you graduate, but there's a drilling. And there's a cavernous inside that begins to fill. Now, when you graduate, it allows you, teaches you how to study, how to use the resources, where to get mentoring from, and it gives you the disciplines necessary to fill that inside of you that was drilled out. Now you have terabytes of storage on the inside, and it still needs to be written and put together, but you've got the capacity. And then these things come in handy because each time you journal, there's an archive or a depth, as you were saying, Justin, from which Jesus spoke, that gets filled.
You got to be careful. You might date this show a little bit talking about terabytes. You know, in a couple of years, people say, that's all you got inside you? I don't know what comes after terabyte, but I remember when I got my first terabyte hard drive, I thought I was pretty cool, and now it's like, well, everybody's got one of those, right? I've had the privilege of talking with a lot of NFL players who are Christians and interviewing them about how the lessons they've learned in the NFL could help pastors. And I find it fascinating, the thing that came up again and again was the preparation. In order to win a game, you ask any NFL player, and that's the sport I follow most, I'm assuming it's similar in other sports, but it's all about the preparation they did that week. Whether they win or lose has already almost been decided based on the preparation. And isn't it the same thing true for us? If we win that day, you call it winning, you know, by having a great day. I think it goes back to what was the preparation we did that morning, and also what was the preparation that we've been doing up until that. How do we prepare as Christians? It's daily devotions, it's prayer, right?
Yeah, it's like scales to a piano player. The piano player is not going to do a concert of scales, but unless he does scales, his concert and the lack of quality will show. And it's the scales. And so every Christian is like a pianist, a concert pianist. Whether you're going to play jazz, blues, classical, everyone does scales. And then it's transferred into the specific discipline that you will be utilizing. And whether you're a youth pastor, senior pastor, tech pastor, you're someone that does multimedia, doesn't really matter. We're all ambassadors for Christ. You better be doing your scales, because that's the source, that's the aquifer from which you're going to draw and give water to different areas and people groups.
I think part of the problem, and I think you and I actually talked about this once before, is when you are a concert pianist, you can get away with not doing scales for a day or two and still be, pretty dang good. But over, pretty quickly, the audience is going to start to notice. And I think with us too, we could get away with not doing devotions for a day, for a couple of days, depending on, the well that we're drawing from. But pretty soon we're going to start to get off track, and we're not even going to notice that we're getting off track necessarily. It's like eating. You can eat horrible for a day, skip your exercise. You're not necessarily going to affect your waistline. But pretty quickly, you keep following that trend, all of a sudden you've gained 50 pounds, and it's a heck of a lot harder to get back to where you were.
That's right. And Jean Paderewski, great pianist, said, if I skip scales for one day and I play in a concert, I can tell. If I skip it for 2 days and I play in a concert, my coach can tell. And if I skip scales for 3 days and I play in a concert, the world can tell. And so it's absolutely critical that we get ourselves back in the gymnase to discipline ourselves for the purpose of godliness.
We had a question come in from Marina. It's a little bit off the topic, so let's see what you think about this. But she's asking thoughts or book recommendations on studying religions. Maybe what's your general approach to studying other religions and understanding what they're all about?
Yeah, there's so many books out there, and you can just Google that, top books on study of religion. You can start there, and they'll give you a plethora of books. The dangerous thing is you have to make sure that that is written by someone who is a God-fearing person, God-fearing author, because everyone's going to have their own vantage point and slant. And so if it's an atheist, he's going to slip in little doubts all the way along, and you won't even know that you're swallowing it, but it's going to be wrapped in sugar cubes and you'll swallow it. And then you'll wonder why you have so many doubts. It's because you've been eating poorly without checking the label. So make sure you turn it over and it's written by a God-fearing man so that you can study other religions, but it's coming from God's point of view, because that's your aquifer that you want to return to. It's not the aquifer that you want to depart from.
Especially when you're younger in your faith, right? When you don't have a strong foundation you're standing on, where those doubts might be easier to enter in because you just frankly haven't thought about it that long. You haven't been introduced to a whole lot of ideas, and you hear somebody argue something effectively, and you say, "Well,
Justin,
boy, that sounds pretty true, right?"
Yeah. Justin, God calls us sheep. In fact, even in the arrangement, he says he's going to put sheep on his right, goats on his left. If you take a look at the sheep, the sheep are those creatures that eat what the shepherd leads them to and what the shepherd feeds them. Goats, on the other hand, eat what the shepherd feeds them, but they'll eat anything. They'll eat anything that anybody gives them, cans included. And it's interesting, the Lord says, you're not goats, you're sheep. And a sheep follow the shepherd. They eat what the shepherd gives them to eat. Goats are different. So if you're studying about different religions, make sure that you're eating what God is feeding and not just eating anything, because that will cause there to be a difference in your spirit, in your DNA, and turns us into goats rather than sheep.
Yeah. I'm curious if you have any stories to share about some life change that you've seen happen in your congregation when people have started to implement daily devotions.
Yeah, at first you don't see a lot of difference, but it's sort of like this. It's like taking a sapling and your daily working of the soil, making sure that there's fertilizer there, that is right water and irrigation, you don't see anything now. But when harvest time comes, there is a world of difference between a tree that hasn't been tended to, the roots haven't been fertilized correctly, there hasn't been a daily tending and daily watering, and the one that has. In harvest time, there is a universe of difference. So what we do is we make sure that there is devotions going on in the church, and when there's a season of favor and you need something to happen, there's fruit everywhere. So is there a difference? Absolutely. The second difference is this. In the same metaphor of plants and saplings, when there's a famine that happens, even though when things are normal, the trees, the saplings look sort of the same, but in harvest time they're different, and also in famine. When there's a drought, this one will wither that fast. This other one that is being tended to can go another month or two without water. And all it'll do is when there is a drought, it will drive and drill its roots deeper, and it'll be bringing up water from a far deeper source because it has the energy to drill deep when there's no water, and it begins to bring up water from a deeper source. The difference on this one, it doesn't have any strength to drill any deeper. It's like on welfare, and it dies when a drought happens. I wonder how many Christians are welfare Christians because they haven't been tending to their root system. And that's what devotions are all about.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful picture because, if you take that analogy out and if we have that strength within us from the long-term approach to our daily devotions, and somebody comes along that needs help, well, when we help that person, we're taking some of their problems onto ourselves emotionally, and if we don't have that deep well, then we're going to wither with them. We can't help people very well who come into our lives if we don't have that. So, beautiful picture. We're getting close to the end of our time here, and so I wanted to ask you, Pastor Wayne, if you have any closing thoughts to leave with the audience today. I want to thank those of you who have been sharing some questions, and if you continue to ask them, any questions that you bring up, we will try to address those with future blog posts on MentoringLeaders.com, and we hope to continue to bring topics to you via this format, Mentoring Leaders Live. So please keep asking those questions, use that hashtag, and let's turn it back to you, Pastor Wayne. Close us out with maybe a final thought to take with us today.
Well, what we're trying to do in MentoringLeaders.com is to develop in each of us a daily pattern of health, because health doesn't come overnight. Health comes from daily patterns. Same like losing weight. We'd love to take a pill and it all goes away. Doesn't happen. It's changing the daily patterns. And let's stay in touch with one another. And let me encourage you as we close, is your daily devotions is something you will do daily, because wisdom doesn't come in a day, but it does come daily. It comes from what you do daily. Let's be people of wisdom, especially in these last days, and it'll be what you will garner daily from the Word of God that'll get you there.
Well, thanks again, Pastor Wayne, for joining us, and thank you all for joining us in the audience and the great questions. And we hope to be in touch with you soon with more content from MentoringLeaders.com. We'd love for you to bookmark that site and share it with your friends. We've really dedicated ourselves to sharing some great content there regularly that we hope will edify you. No strings attached. We just want to bless you with that content. So join us again on Mentoring Leaders Live, and we'll see you all soon. Take care.
God bless you all.